Coming up on our newscast, South Korea's first wholly domestically produced rocket is launched successfully. The event opens a new chapter in the nation's space program. The Yoon administration reveals measures for the property market. The plan centers around stabilizing rent and tax incentives to encourage contract renewals. Seoul's Unification Minister expresses willingness to meet his North Korean counterpart, but warned nuclear tests could only weaken the regime's security and economy. Hello and welcome to our newscast. I'm Daniel Che. Let's begin with our top story. South Korea's first entirely domestically developed space rocket Nuri soared into the skies from the NATO Space Center, and its satellites have entered orbit. Our Han Sung-woo has been covering the historic launch on the site. Files us this report.
Mission accomplished. South Korea has become the seventh country in the world to be independently capable of sending a satellite weighing over a ton into orbit using domestic technology. At 4 p.m. on Tuesday, the nation's first homegrown space rocket, Nuri, soared into the skies for the second time and didn't disappoint. The three-stage space rocket, after reaching its target altitude of 700 kilometers, placed both its performance verification satellite holding 4 functioning mini-cube satellites and its 1.3-ton dummy satellite into orbit, 70 seconds apart at around 4:15 p.m. As confirmed by the Ministry of Science and ICT and the Korea Aerospace Research Institute's joint presser at the NATO Space Center about an hour after the launch.
Nuri reached its target altitude and successfully placed the performance satellite into orbit.
Like Minister Lee Jong-ho just said, we have successfully carried out Nuri's second launch.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol wasn't present on site for the event, but watched it from his office in Yongsan-gu District and later exclaimed that the way to space had opened, calling the launch a product of 30 years of effort, and also promised the country's aerospace officials boosted support.
정부도 제가 공약에서 말씀드린 바와 같이 항공우주청을 설치해서 이 항공우주 산업을 체계적으로 지원하겠습니다. 고맙습니다. 정말 수고 많으셨습니다.
During U.S. President Joe Biden's visit to Seoul last month, President Yoon vowed to strengthen bilateral cooperation on space development, particularly the Artemis program, a U.S.-led international space exploration endeavor that aims to make manned lunar exploration possible by 2025, construct a manned lunar base by 2028, and in the long term, even prepare for missions to Mars. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News, Gohung.
South Korea has taken a meaningful step in its space program by sending its satellites into space using a homegrown launcher. Next phase, 4 more such events within 5 years to improve related technology. Bae Eun-ji has the details.
Through the successful launch of South Korea's domestically developed rocket Nuri, South Korea took a major step in its space program and boosted the country's growing space ambitions. Now, the country will no longer have to rely on launchers from other countries to put its satellites into orbit. It may also possibly be able to export this technology to other countries in the future.
Now we can help other countries develop satellites and put them into orbit using our launcher. So it's a meaningful step because we are now able to send our satellite into space with our launcher whenever we want.
But Tuesday's launch is just the beginning. South Korea plans to send Nuri into space for 4 more times over the next 5 years.
Our government plans to stage 4 additional launches by 2027 and improve technical reliability and stability.
The next launch is slated for 2023, when the country will be sending a small satellite that weighs 100 kilograms into space. Then it'll send several small satellites into space from 2024 to 2027. Also, in August this year, South Korea plans to mobilize its lunar orbiter, Nuri, for the first time. After more than 6 years spent perfecting its design and trajectory, it'll lift off from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. It will orbit the moon for about a year, and if successful, it'll be the first South Korean mission to travel beyond Earth's orbit. The country's ultimate goal is to send a lunar landing module to the moon by 2031. 배은지, Arirang News.
South Korean companies are jumping into space business to develop 6G communication and lunar exploration technology. The goal is to increase the nation's market share by making giant antennas and multi-orbit satellites. Jung Eun-ji explains further.
A giant satellite antenna with a diameter of 27.4 meters is South Korea's National Registered Cultural Heritage number 436. In 1970, it became South Korea's first to provide satellite communications to 7 overseas countries. The Kumsan Satellite Service Center in Chungcheongnam-do Province, operated by domestic telecommunications firm KTSAT, has now grown into the largest of its kind in Asia, with 45 giant antennas and 5 satellites. With a network that covers 60% of the world, KTSAT provides high-speed satellite data, broadcasting, and marine communications, and has launched a space data business that combines artificial intelligence with satellite data. KTSAT plans to establish a multi-orbit satellite communication network equipped with low-orbit satellites at an altitude of 500 kilometers, medium-orbit satellites, and geostationary satellites at an altitude of 36,000 kilometers that cover the entire world by 2030. A terrestrial network is sufficient for 5G, but satellite communication is essential for 6G, which transmits 125 gigabytes per second.
Construction of the 6G system itself uses both terrestrial and satellite networks. That's why, without building both together, it'd be difficult to have the communication services expected from 6G.
SK Broadband opened the Yeoju Satellite Center in Gyeonggi-do Province in 2017 to receive overseas broadcasts via satellite and use it as part of its IPTV service. The Yeoju Satellite Center has 1 antenna that is 11 meters wide and 4 antennas with a diameter of 6.4 meters. These antennas are also used for deep space exploration at a distance of more than 1 million kilometers. Equipped with a reflector that's 35 meters wide, the antennas will be in charge of ground equipment related to the lunar probe scheduled to be launched in August and Korean lunar orbiter deep space communication. The global space industry market is worth around $340 billion, but the size of South Korea's is only about $2.7 billion. As growth of the global space industry is expected to double over the next decade, South Korea is setting its sights on thoroughly preparing related businesses. Jung Eun-ju, Arirang News.
In a cabinet meeting, President Yoon Suk-yeol emphasized reform of public institutions must not be delayed further. New measures would include tightening up government spending. Yoon Jung-min shares with us his remarks.
모든 정책의 목표가 첫째도 민생, 둘째도 민생, 셋째도 민생이라는 점을 잊지 마시기 바랍니다.
This is how President Yoon Suk-yeol emphasized the need to address economic difficulties during Tuesday's weekly cabinet meeting, urging all public servants to work with a sense of crisis. And this week's meeting focused on reforming public institutions, where the president said there's a need for intensive adjustments to spending.
공공기관 혁신은 더 이상 미룰 수 없는 과제입니다. 부채가 급증하고 있음에도 불구하고 지난 5년간 공공기관의 조직과 인력은 크게 늘었습니다. 공공기관 평가를 엄격히 하고 방만하게 운영되어 온 부분은 과감하게 개선해야 합니다.
Yoon added that debts owed by public institutions have shot up during the past 5 years to 583 trillion won, which is about $450 billion. Noting as an example the sharp interest rate hikes by the U.S. Federal Reserve, the president said countries around the world are doing all they can to tackle economic challenges and once again stressed the need for a private-led economy and the cutting of red tape.
우리 경제의 성장 발목을 잡고 있는 이권 카르텔, 부당한 지대 추구의 폐습을 단호하게 없애는 것이 바로 규제 혁신이고 우리 경제를 키우는 것입니다.
On Tuesday, the cabinet agreed to lower quota tariffs to 0% on 13 import items where supplies and prices have been unstable, including cooking oil, flour, and pork, and to extend the current tax incentives for car buyers. Bracing for what lies ahead, the top office has already activated an emergency economy response system while it'll look into streamlining public institutions so that more money can be saved and used for people in need. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The BOK warns the nation could face inflation worse than the 2008 global financial crisis. Prices are heading higher because of geopolitical issues and bad weather. Kim Hyun-sung helps us look beyond the digits.
South Korea may soon see inflation worse than the one in 2008 during the global financial crisis. The Bank of Korea on Tuesday projected that prices may grow at rates faster than they did in 2008, when prices rose 4.7% on year. Already, the rate of inflation seen earlier this year was similar to the one seen 14 years ago. But analysts at the central bank are projecting even greater increases for June, surpassing May's 14-year high figures. And it may stay above 5% for the latter half of the year as well. The increases come on the back of global geopolitical and climate-related events, including Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has driven up oil prices, and dry weather, which has resulted in a hike in grain prices.
The supply-side effects are showing up as price and wage increases. Also, with social distancing lifted, inflationary pressure on the demand side has also increased.
The lifting of social distancing measures led to more people dining out, which, along with higher demand for processed foods, pushed prices up. And with that in mind, the Bank of Korea is also concerned about agflation, when a rise in agricultural commodity prices drive up living costs.
In particular, the agflation phenomenon caused by rising international food prices is likely to continue for a long time due to its downward, rigid and persisting characteristics.
Meanwhile, core inflation, which doesn't count volatile food and energy prices, jumped above 3% in April and May. And with the risk of recession in the U.S. looming large, domestic and international markets may become even more erratic than they are now, heightening risks of steep price rises and sluggish economic growth. The Bank of Korea says that it'll rely on data and numerous forms of indices to keep monetary policies flexible and adaptable in a risky economic climate. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
With housing prices continuing to soar, the government unveiled more measures to stabilize the market. The first package of policies are designed to provide tax incentives to landlords who minimize rent hike, plus tax deductions for tenants. Jung provides a glimpse of what to expect.
The Yoon Suk-yeol administration's first package of measures on the housing market aims to stabilize the cost of rent. Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho, in his first government meeting on the property market on Tuesday, said, first of all, there will be tax incentives to encourage housing contracts to be renewed.
Landlords who voluntarily raise rents by less than 5% will be exempt from capital gains tax when selling their homes if they own just one.
Also, when selling their property, landlords who've raised rents by less than 5% will be entitled to the special tax reduction for long-term homeowners, even if they never lived in the home themselves for more than 2 years. The plan also includes help for tenants using Korea's unique system of jeonse, where the tenant gives the landlord a huge lump sum deposit instead of paying monthly rent, the deposit for which is often borrowed from a bank.
Considering the rise in prices of jeonse deposits over the last 4 years, the government will increase the maximum amount of the deposits tenants can borrow.
Those repaying such loans will be able to deduct more of it on their taxes, with the maximum deduction to be raised from the current 3 million won to 4 million won, or about $3,000. For tenants paying monthly rent, their deduction will be raised from the current 12% of their rent to a maximum of 15%. Also, to get more people on the property ladder, the government will exempt first-time buyers from up to 2 million won, or about $1,500 of acquisition tax. The government aims to come up with reforms on comprehensive real estate tax by next month, and then by mid-August, it'll lay out detailed plans on how to supply 2.5 million more homes. 엄지영, Arirang News.
The nation's total trade deficit has risen to more than $15 billion, on track to be in the red by the end of the year. According to Korea Customs Service, outbound shipments in the first 20 days of June amounted to $31.3 billion, a decline of 3.4% on year. Imports jumped by 21.1% to $39 billion. Deficit for the month so far exceeds $7.7 billion. The Korea International Trade Association forecasts a figure to reach $14.7 billion. If so, this would be the first deficit since the 2008 global financial crisis and the biggest one since 1996. Key driving factors include soaring cost of oil. Seoul's Unification Minister is willing to meet his North Korean counterpart, but the official also warned nuclear tests would only weaken the regime's security and economy. Min Soo-kyun fills us in.
South Korea's Unification Minister Kwon Young-se has vowed to make room for dialogue with North Korea and hopefully improve inter-Korean ties, which have been strained. Speaking to reporters, Kwon said he's willing to meet with former North Korean Foreign Minister Lee Sun-kwon, who now leads the United Front Department, which deals with inter-Korean relations. Kwon was speaking Tuesday in his first press conference as the country's Unification Minister.
The government remains consistent in its position that all issues between the two Koreas should be resolved through dialogue. And as Unification Minister, I'm willing to talk with Lee Sun-kwon, the head of the United Front Department, anytime, anywhere, and in any format.
However, he made clear that he does not necessarily mean that an official offer of dialogue has been made to Pyongyang. While raising hopes for talks, the minister also warned North Korea to stop its preparations for another nuclear test, saying that it will do no good for the regime or its people.
What I would like to tell the North is that while it may be possible to make some progress in nuclear-related technology through tests, eventually that will only lead to a weakening of North Korea's security and a deterioration of its economy.
He also said that the imposing of sanctions and exerting pressure on the North are ultimately aimed at the complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula and nothing more. With the international community, he says, South Korea will work to coordinate a unified policy on North Korea, hinting that it will impose stronger sanctions should the North carry out a seventh nuclear test. The minister added that Pyongyang appears to be physically ready, but said it's hard to anticipate when the regime will actually conduct a test. So far, North Korea has conducted 6 nuclear tests, the last one in 2017. Min Soo-kyun, Arirang News.
The remains of a Korean War veteran from Canada have been laid to rest on Korean soil. The burial ceremony for John Robert Cormier took place on Tuesday afternoon at the UN Memorial Cemetery in Busan. He fought in the Korean War for a year at the age of 19 in 1952. Before passing last November, Cormier's family was told he wished to be buried in South Korea. This is the 14th time the remains of a UN Korean War vet is brought to the country to be buried. South Korea will provide $50 million worth of humanitarian aid to Ukraine. President Yoon will present it at the NATO summit in Madrid later this month. With this support package, South Korea would have provided a total of $100 million worth of non-lethal aid to Ukraine. The latest includes around 25 tons of emergency medical supplies to be sent next Tuesday. A Russian Nobel Peace Prize laureate auctioned off his medal for a record $103.5 million to raise money for Ukrainian refugee children. Dmitry Muratov sold the medal won last year to a mystery bidder at an auction in New York. All the proceeds went directly to UNICEF. This came on top of the $500,000 that Muratov pledged to donate to charity. The journalist co-founded the independent Russian newspaper Novaya Gazeta, whose publication was suspended after warnings from the Kremlin over its coverage of the Ukraine war. Elsewhere around the world, at least 26 people have lost their lives in the Indian state of Assam, and in Bangladesh, 32 people due to the ongoing floods. Also in that country, around 3.7 million people are stranded as the flood waters rise. 300,000 people are staying in government-run shelters. In Assam, 4.5 million people have been displaced. More than 200,000 are in shelters. Every year during the monsoon season from June to September, both countries experience devastating floods, which have been made worse by climate change. The International Day of Yoga. June 21st is when yoga enthusiasts around the world gather to share their love for the discipline. South Korea is no exception. Shin Yeon went to an event to mark the occasion in Seoul.
Namaste. June 21st is a meaningful day for yoga lovers around the world. It's International Yoga Day. Back in 2014, India's Prime Minister proposed to the UN General Assembly that yoga should be celebrated every year. Acknowledging its main mission to spread peace, 177 nations supported this proposition. This year, Korea celebrated the 8th International Day of Yoga at Seoul's Hodemun Independence Park. The Indian Embassy in Korea chose this iconic cultural site because it's also where Korea and India jointly inaugurated a peace park to celebrate the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi.
I'm here at the International Day of Yoga event. It's the first time in 2 years since an in-person event like this has been held due to the pandemic. Now, as you can see around me, there's many yoga enthusiasts varying of age and different skills coming together to find inner peace.
Though each participant had different reasons why they started yoga, it was their love for the discipline that brought them all here.
Decided to try out yoga because it had a low entry barrier. You could do it anywhere as long as you have a yoga mat. I'm so happy that I came to this event to meet fellow yogis and just relax.
I fell in love with yoga when I was job hunting. Back then I had horrible back pain and yoga made me feel better. I never missed an opportunity to do it. Even today I took a day off work just to come here.
The Indian ambassador to South Korea said yoga has definitely brought the two countries closer.
It's a very accessible discipline, and it's a discipline that really brings together the mind, body, and soul. And I think through this means we are really able to identify and build on this age-old friendship between India and Korea.
This was a popular opinion among other yogis.
Even though yoga originated from India, it is definitely something anyone can try out and relate to. It brings the world together.
The Indian Embassy in South Korea plans to host more yoga-related events in Busan on June 27th, along with the rest of the world, as celebrations usually run for days. Shin Yeon, Arirang News.
Baking hot conditions will continue across South Korea until tomorrow. Heat wave alerts will stay in place for most inland regions. Parts of Gyeongsang-buk-do province are still under heat wave warnings. Places like Uiseong County will be very hot at 35 degrees Celsius tomorrow. Keep in mind that humid conditions will make temperatures feel hotter than the actual readings. And for tonight, on and off showers are in the forecast for Gangwon-do and Jeollado provinces. Another monsoonal rain front will be approaching South Korea this coming Thursday. This will produce showers for the entire nation. And between Thursday night and Friday morning, showers will become heavier, containing thunder and lightning. About 20 to 80 millimeters of rainfall are in the forecast. Morning lows in Seoul, Busan, and Gwangju will be starting off at 22 degrees Celsius. And daytime highs in Seoul will be reaching 30 degrees, Gyeongju 36, Gwangju will reach 33 degrees. Temperatures will start to cool down on Thursday with the help of nationwide showers. It's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all from us. As always, thank you for watching.
전통과 새로움이 만나 더 큰 가치를 만들어갑니다. 그 가치들은